The weight of irons clamped around her wrists matched the heaviness in Penelope Evans' heart as she paced the cramped confines of the Redemption Springs jail cell, her wedding dress now stained with dirt and tears. 3 days ago, she'd been a bride-to-be. Now she was a prisoner accused of theft, abandoned by the man who'd promised to love her forever. The sound of spurs jingling against wooden floorboards made her lift her gaze from the dusty floor. Sheriff Donovan leaned against the cell bars, his weathered face tight with smug satisfaction. "Got yourself a visitor, Miss Evans," he drawled, stepping aside to reveal a tall stranger whose face was partially obscured by the shadow of his Stetson. The year was 1875, and in this corner of Arizona territory, a woman alone had few allies and even fewer options. The stranger stepped forward, removing his hat to reveal a face bronzed by the sun and framed by dark hair. His eyes, keen and assessing, locked with hers. "Xavier Yates," he introduced himself with a slight nod. "Seems you've found yourself in a spot of trouble." Penelope gripped the bars, her knuckles whitening. "I'm innocent. Theodore Waldman accused me of stealing his mother's jewelry to avoid marrying me. The coward couldn't simply tell me he'd changed his mind." Xavier's expression remained neutral, though something flickered in his eyes. He turned to the sheriff. "What's her fine?" $50, Sheriff Donovan replied, scratching his beard. "Plus court costs, 75 total." Without hesitation, Xavier reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a leather pouch. He counted out the money and placed it in the sheriff's outstretched hand. "What are you doing?" Penelope whispered, stunned. "Paying your fine," Xavier replied simply. The sheriff's keys jangled as he unlocked the cell. "She's all yours, Yates. Though I can't imagine why you'd want to saddle yourself with a thief." Xavier's jaw tightened. "The lady says she's innocent. That's good enough for me." Penelope stepped out of the cell, her legs weak from days of poor sleep and meager rations. "Why would you do this? You don't even know me." Xavier placed his hat back on his head. "I know enough. My ranch is 10 miles west of town. You need somewhere to stay until you figure out your next move." "And what do you expect in return?" Penelope asked warily, too familiar with men who offered help only to demand payment of another kind. "Nothing you're not willing to give," he answered evenly. "Right now, that's just your word that you won't steal my horses and disappear in the night." For the first time in days, Penelope felt a glimmer of hope. "You have my word, Mr. Yates." "Xavier," he corrected. "If you're coming home with me, we might as well use our Christian names." As they stepped out into the harsh sunlight, Penelope squinted against the brightness, the weight of the scandal and her near imprisonment still heavy on her shoulders. The main street of Redemption Springs stretched before them, and she could feel the stares of the townspeople burning into her back. "Ignore them," Xavier said quietly. "Their memories are short when there's fresh gossip to be had." "My reputation is ruined," Penelope murmured. "I've been engaged twice now, and both times ended in disgrace." Xavier helped her onto his wagon. "Reputations can be rebuilt. It's just a matter of time and distance." As they pulled away from town, Penelope looked back at the place that had promised her a new start after she'd fled her first failed engagement in Boston. Now, at 22, she was adrift again, placing her trust in a stranger who'd paid for her freedom. "Why did you really help me?" she asked as the town disappeared behind them. Xavier kept his eyes on the dusty trail ahead. "Let's just say I know what it's like to be falsely accused." The journey to Xavier's ranch took nearly 2 hours. They traveled in companionable silence, broken only by Xavier occasionally pointing out landmarks or sharing bits of information about the territory. The landscape shifted from dusty plains to rolling hills dotted with scrub and cacti, the horizon stretching endlessly beneath the vast blue sky. As they crested a hill, Xavier slowed the horses. "Welcome to the Diamond Y," he said, gesturing to the valley below. Penelope's eyes widened. The ranch was larger than she'd expected, a sturdy main house built of stone and timber, a large barn, several outbuildings, and corrals filled with horses. In the distance, cattle grazed on the sparse grass. "It's beautiful," she breathed. A hint of pride colored Xavier's voice. "Been building it up for 5 years now. Started with nothing but 20 acres and 3 skinny cows." They rattled down the hill toward the ranch house. As they approached, a wiry man with a shock of gray hair emerged from the barn. "That's Hank," Xavier explained. "Foreman and the closest thing to family I've got out here." Hank watched curiously as Xavier helped Penelope down from the wagon. "Didn't know we were expecting company, boss," Hank said, his eyes taking in Penelope's bedraggled wedding dress. "Miss Evans will be staying with us for a while," Xavier explained. "She's had some trouble in town," understanding dawned on Hank's weathered face. "Ah, you're the bride from the jail. News travels fast around these parts." Penelope's cheeks burned with embarrassment. "Hank," Xavier warned, the foreman raised his hands. "No judgment here, miss. Any friend of Xavier's is welcome at the Diamond Y." Xavier led Penelope to the house. It was simple but well built, with a wide porch that wrapped around the front. Inside, the main room was dominated by a stone fireplace, with sturdy furniture arranged for comfort rather than show. "It's not much," Xavier said, suddenly seeming self-conscious. "It's lovely," Penelope replied honestly. After the squalor of the jail cell, the clean, orderly home seemed like a palace. Xavier showed her to a small bedroom off the main living area. "This was meant to be for guests, though we don't get many out this way. The washroom is through that door." "I'll have Rosa bring up some hot water." Rosa, Hank's wife, she helps with the cooking and keeping the place in order. Penelope sat gingerly on the edge of the bed. "I don't know how to thank you for all this." Xavier shrugged. "No need, get some rest. We can talk more at supper." Left alone, Penelope finally allowed the tears she'd been holding back to fall. The events of the past week crashed over her. Theodore's public accusation, the humiliation of being dragged to jail in her wedding dress, the abandonment by those she'd thought were friends. Now she was dependent on the kindness of a stranger, a quiet cowboy whose motives she still couldn't fully understand. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Miss, I've brought water for you to wash," called a woman's voice. Penelope quickly dried her tears and opened the door to find a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and silver-streaked black hair. "I'm Rosa," the woman said, carrying in a large pitcher of steaming water. "Mr. Yates told me what happened. Don't you worry, no one here believes you're a thief." "Thank you," Penelope said, touched by the woman's immediate acceptance. Rosa set down the pitcher and poured some water into a basin. "I've brought some of my daughter's clothes. She's married now, living in Tucson. They might be a bit large, but they'll do until we can get your things from town." "My things are gone," Penelope admitted. "I was staying at the boarding house, but Mrs. Pringle threw everything out after my arrest." Rosa clicked her tongue disapprovingly. "That woman never did have a Christian bone in her body. No matter, we'll manage. Dinner's in an hour." After Rosa left, Penelope washed away the grime of the jail cell, relishing the feel of clean water against her skin. The borrowed dress was simple but clean, a blue calico that hung a bit loose on her frame. She'd lost weight during her ordeal, she realized. When she emerged for dinner, she found Xavier and Hank seated at a long table with Rosa bringing out a pot of stew. Xavier stood when she entered, and Penelope was struck by the old-world courtesy of the gesture. "Feel better?" he asked. "Much, thank you." Dinner was a simple but hearty affair: venison stew, fresh bread, and preserved peaches. Hank kept the conversation flowing with tales of ranch life, carefully avoiding any mention of Penelope's circumstances. She was grateful for the normalcy of it all, the first meal in days where she wasn't being stared at or whispered about. After dinner, Rosa and Hank retired to their cabin near the barn, leaving Penelope and Xavier alone. "I should earn my keep while I'm here," Penelope said as they sat by the fire. "I can cook, clean, mend clothes." Xavier studied her for a moment. "You're not a servant, Penelope." "Nevertheless, I won't be a burden." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "All right. Rosa could use some help around the house, I suppose, but first you need to recover your strength." Penelope nodded, then gathered her courage. "May I ask about your comment earlier, about being falsely accused?" Xavier was quiet for so long that Penelope thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he sighed, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames. 6 years ago, I was working as a trail boss for the Blackwell outfit in Texas. There was a payroll robbery, and because I'd been in town that day, suspicion fell on me. The evidence was circumstantial, but in those days, that was enough. His voice was level, but Penelope could hear the old pain underneath. I spent 8 months in prison before the real thieves were caught. That's terrible, Penelope whispered. Xavier shrugged. It taught me not to judge too quickly when I heard about you in town. Well, I know how it feels when no one believes your word. Thank you for believing me, Penelope said softly. Their eyes met across the warm room, and something silent passed between them, a recognition of shared injustice, perhaps, or the beginning of understanding. It's getting late, Xavier said, breaking the moment. You should get some rest. That night in the unfamiliar bed, Penelope lay awake considering her situation. She had no money, no possessions beyond the borrowed clothes on her back, and nowhere to go. Yet for the first time since Theodore's betrayal, she felt a small measure of peace. Xavier Yates might be a stranger, but he'd shown her more kindness in one day than she'd received in weeks. With that thought, she finally drifted into the first restful sleep she'd had in days. The next morning, Penelope woke to sunlight streaming through the curtains and the smell of coffee and bacon. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then the events of the previous day came rushing back, and she sat up, taking in the simple, clean room that was now her temporary sanctuary. She dressed quickly in the borrowed clothes and made her way to the kitchen, where she found Rosa kneading dough. "Good morning," Penelope said. "Can I help with anything?" Rosa smiled. "You can set the table if you like. The men will be in soon." As Penelope arranged plates and cutlery, Xavier and Hank entered, bringing with them the scent of horses and morning air. "Sleep well?" Xavier asked, pouring himself coffee from the pot on the stove. "Better than I have in days," Penelope admitted. Breakfast was a hearty affair of eggs, bacon, and fresh biscuits. Hank regaled them with a story about a stubborn calf that had led them on a merry chase the previous week, and Penelope found herself laughing for the first time since her ordeal began. After breakfast, Xavier pulled on his hat. "I've got to ride out to the north pasture today. Probably won't be back until sundown." "I'll keep busy," Penelope assured him. "Rosa's promised to show me around." True to her word, Rosa spent the morning acquainting Penelope with the workings of the ranch house where supplies were kept, which pump provided the best water, how to manage the temperamental stove. Penelope absorbed it all eagerly, grateful for the distraction. In the afternoon, they tackled the mending pile, and Penelope's skilled fingers soon impressed Rosa. "Where did you learn to sew like that?" the older woman asked, watching as Penelope expertly repaired a tear in one of Xavier's shirts. "My mother taught me," Penelope replied, her throat tightening at the memory. "She died when I was 16. After that, I worked as a seamstress in Boston for several years." "How did you end up in Arizona territory?" Penelope hesitated, then decided honesty was best. "I was engaged to a man in Boston, the son of my employer. When he broke it off, the scandal was too much. I answered an advertisement from a man seeking a mail-order bride." "Theodore Waldman," Rosa guessed. Penelope nodded. "We corresponded for 6 months. He seemed kind, respectable. When I arrived, he appeared to be everything his letters suggested, but on our wedding day..." She trailed off. Rosa patted her hand. "You don't have to explain." "No, I want to," Penelope insisted. "Theodore claimed his mother's ruby necklace was missing. He accused me of stealing it right there in the church. The sheriff was attending the wedding. He arrested me on the spot. And the necklace, I never saw it, never touched it, I think." Penelope lowered her voice. "I think Theodore invented the theft to avoid marrying me. I later heard he'd been courting the banker's daughter before my arrival." Rosa's face darkened with indignation. What a cowardly thing to do to a young woman. They worked in silence for a while, the rhythmic motion of needle and thread soothing Penelope's raw emotions. "Xavier is a good man," Rosa said suddenly. "The best I've known besides my Hank. What he did for you, it's just his way. He sees injustice and he can't abide it." Penelope felt her cheeks warm. "He's been very kind." Rosa's eyes twinkled knowingly. "He's also been alone too long. A man needs a wife, especially out here." "Oh, I don't think," Penelope began, flustered. Rosa laughed softly. "I'm just saying, sometimes God's plans work in mysterious ways." That evening, Xavier returned tired but satisfied with the day's work. Penelope had helped Rosa prepare a stew, and the 4 of them ate together. the conversation flowing easily. Afterward, as Rosa and Hank retired to their cabin, Xavier invited Penelope to join him on the porch. The night was clear, a canopy of stars spreading above them, more brilliant than Penelope had ever seen in Boston or even Redemption Springs. "It's beautiful," she breathed, gazing upward. "One of the reasons I chose this place," Xavier admitted. "You can see forever on a night like this." They sat in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the distant lowing of cattle and the occasional hoot of an owl. "I spoke with Hank about getting you to Tucson," Xavier said finally. "If that's where you want to go, there's a stage that runs through Redemption Springs once a week. I can arrange passage for you." Penelope's heart sank at the thought of leaving. "That's very kind of you." "Or," Xavier continued, his voice carefully neutral, "you could stay a while longer, at least until you decide what you want to do." Relief flooded through her. "I'd like that." "If I'm not imposing." "You're not," he assured her. "Truth be told, it's nice having another person around. The place can get lonely." Their eyes met in the dim light, and Penelope felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with anxiety or fear. "Tell me about yourself," Xavier said. "Before all this happened." And so she did. She told him about growing up in Boston, the daughter of a teacher and a seamstress, about losing her father to influenza when she was 10 and her mother 6 years later. About working in the dressmaker's shop where she'd met her first fiancé, Charles Witherton. "He was the owner's son," she explained. "Charming, well-educated, I thought I was in love." "What happened?" Xavier asked. Penelope sighed. "His parents discovered our engagement. They disapproved I wasn't from their social circle. Charles promised to stand by me, but in the end, he couldn't defy his family. He broke it off publicly, claiming I'd tried to trap him into marriage." Xavier's jaw tightened. "Seems you've had your share of dishonorable men." "Perhaps I'm a poor judge of character," Penelope said, trying to keep her tone light. "Or perhaps they were simply cowards," Xavier countered. "A real man stands by his word." The conviction in his voice touched something deep within Penelope. "And what about you? How did you end up ranching in Arizona territory?" Xavier leaned back in his chair. "I grew up in Missouri. My father was a blacksmith. I learned the trade from him, but I always wanted something more. When I was 18, I headed west, worked as a cowhand, then trail boss. After the false accusation and prison time, I couldn't go back to Texas. Too many memories." He gestured to the land around them. "I won the initial 20 acres in a poker game, if you can believe it, built the rest acre by acre, cow by cow." "You've accomplished a great deal," Penelope said admiringly. Xavier shrugged. "I've been lucky in some ways, and I had help. Hank and Rosa have been with me since the beginning." As the night deepened, Penelope found herself relaxing in Xavier's company, his steady presence a balm to her wounded spirit. When they finally said goodnight, there was a reluctance on both sides, as if they'd reached a turning point in their acquaintance that neither was quite ready to acknowledge. In the days that followed, Penelope fell into the rhythm of ranch life. She helped Rosa with the household tasks, learned to gather eggs without getting pecked by the temperamental hens, and even tried her hand at making bread in the finicky oven. In the evenings, she would sit with Xavier on the porch, their conversations growing longer and more personal with each passing night. A week after her arrival, Rosa announced that she and Hank needed to travel to town for supplies. "We'll be gone overnight," Rosa explained. "My sister lives there, we always stay with her." Penelope nodded, then realized the implication. She and Xavier would be alone at the ranch. As if reading her thoughts, Rosa added, "Don't worry about propriety. You and Xavier are both adults, and God knows your intentions are honorable." Still, when Xavier returned from working with the horses that evening to find Penelope alone in the kitchen, there was an awkwardness between them that hadn't existed before. "I thought we might eat outside tonight," Penelope suggested. "It's such a lovely evening." Xavier agreed, and they carried their plates to the table on the porch. The sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, casting a warm glow over the ranch. "You've settled in well," Xavier observed as they ate. Penelope smiled. "It's easy to feel at home here." "You've created something special, Xavier." A shadow crossed his face. "It's still missing something." "What's that?" He seemed to debate with himself before answering. A family, a ranch this size should have children running around it, a real home at its heart. Penelope's pulse quickened. You've never married? Xavier shook his head. Came close once before the arrest. Her name was Margaret. She believed the accusations, couldn't stand the shame of being associated with a supposed thief. I'm sorry, Penelope said softly. Don't be. If she'd truly loved me, she would have believed in me, the way I. He paused, then finished, the way I believe in you. Their eyes met, and Penelope felt as though something invisible but powerful had shifted between them. After dinner, instead of sitting on the porch, Xavier suggested a walk. They strolled among the corrals where several horses nickered softly as they passed. That's Duchess, Xavier said, pointing to a sleek bay mare. She's the gentlest of the bunch. I thought maybe tomorrow, if you'd like, I could teach you to ride. Penelope's eyes widened. I've never been on a horse. Xavier looked surprised. Never. We didn't have much occasion for horseback riding in Boston, she explained, slightly embarrassed. Well, there's no better place to learn than the Diamond Y, Xavier said, and no better teacher than me, if I do say so myself. His playful boast made Penelope laugh. Very well, Mr. Yates, I accept your offer. They continued walking, eventually stopping at a small rise that overlooked the entire ranch. In the gathering dusk, the buildings looked warm and inviting, lanterns beginning to glow in windows. When I first saw this land, Xavier said quietly, I knew it was where I was meant to be. It was like coming home to a place I'd never been before. The simple poetry of his words touched Penelope deeply. This strong, silent man had layers she was only beginning to discover. I've never felt that, she admitted. Even in Boston, I always felt like I was waiting for something else somewhere else. Xavier turned to face her, his expression serious in the fading light. And now, Penelope's heart raced. Now I feel possibilities. He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him in the cool evening air. Penelope, he began, his voice rough with emotion. Whatever he might have said was interrupted by the distant sound of hoofbeats. They both turned to see a rider approaching fast, kicking up dust as he raced toward the ranch house. Xavier's posture changed instantly, alert and wary. Stay behind me, he instructed, leading her quickly back toward the house. By the time they reached the porch, the rider had arrived. It was a young man, barely out of his teens, his face flushed with exertion. Mr. Yates, he called, dismounting in a rush. Sheriff sent me. There's trouble in town. Xavier's expression darkened. What kind of trouble, Jimmy? Theodore Waldman, the young man panted. He's telling everyone you broke Miss Evans out of jail. Says you're harboring a criminal. Some men are talking about forming a posse to come out here. Cold fear gripped Penelope's heart. But Xavier paid my fine. Everything was legal. Jimmy shook his head. Waldman's saying the sheriff had no right to release you, that he was paid off. Sheriff Donovan's denying it, but Waldman's father is backing him up. They've got influence. Xavier's jaw clenched. When? Tomorrow, maybe the next day. Sheriff wanted to warn you. He says he can't stop them if they decide to come. Xavier nodded grimly. Thank you for the warning, Jimmy. You'd best get back before you're missed. After the young man had ridden away, Penelope and Xavier stood in stunned silence on the porch. This is my fault, Penelope finally whispered. I've brought trouble to your door. Xavier took her hands in his grip firm and reassuring. No, the trouble comes from men like Waldman who think they can twist the law to suit themselves. What will we do? Xavier's expression was resolute. First, we'll make sure you're safe. Then we'll deal with Waldman and his lies. They went inside, and Xavier immediately began checking his rifle and pistol. I don't want violence, Penelope protested. Nor do I, Xavier assured her, but I won't be unprepared if they bring it to us. He paced the room, thinking. We need to get you away from here, somewhere safe until this blows over. I won't run, Penelope said firmly. I'm innocent. Running would only make me look guilty. Xavier stopped pacing and looked at her, a mix of admiration and frustration on his face. You're brave, Penelope. But these men could be dangerous, especially if they've been drinking. Then we'll face them together, she insisted. I won't have you risking yourself alone because of me. Their eyes locked in a battle of wills, neither willing to back down. Finally, Xavier sighed. All right. But we need a plan better than just waiting for them to show up. They spent the next hour discussing options. Xavier suggested sending for Hank and the other ranch hands who were scattered across the property, but Penelope worried about involving more people in her troubles. "What if we went to town ourselves?" she suggested suddenly. Confronted Waldman directly in public, Xavier considered this. It could work. He's a coward at heart, might back down if challenged openly. "And if he doesn't, then at least we choose the battlefield," Xavier said grimly. They decided to ride to town at first light. Despite the tension of the situation, there was something comforting about having made a decision, about facing the threat head-on rather than waiting for it to find them. As they prepared for bed, an awkwardness fell between them again, but for different reasons than before. The house seemed smaller somehow, more intimate with just the two of them under its roof and danger looming outside. "I'll sleep on the sofa," Xavier said. "Be ready to hear if anyone approaches." Penelope nodded, though the thought of being alone with her fears made her stomach knot with anxiety. In her room, she changed into the nightgown Rosa had loaned her and sat on the edge of the bed, unable to settle. The events of the day, the peaceful moments with Xavier, the interrupted almost confession, and now this new threat swirled in her mind. A soft knock at her door startled her. "Penelope," Xavier's voice was low, "are you all right?" She opened the door to find him standing there, still fully dressed, concern etched on his features. "I'm fine," she assured him. "Just thinking." Xavier hesitated, then said what I was going to say earlier before we were interrupted. Penelope's heart raced. "Yes. It can wait," he decided, "until after we've dealt with this situation, but I want you to know whatever happens tomorrow He paused, searching for words. "I'm glad you came into my life." The simple declaration warmed her more than any flowery profession could have. "As am I," she replied softly. They stood there for a moment, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. Then Xavier stepped back, clearing his throat. "Try to get some sleep," he advised. "Tomorrow will be challenging." Penelope nodded and closed the door reluctantly. Despite her anxieties, she found herself smiling as she slipped under the covers. In the midst of crisis, something precious was growing between them, something worth fighting for. The next morning dawned clear and bright, a beautiful day that belied the tension coiled in both Penelope and Xavier as they prepared to ride to town. Xavier had insisted on giving Penelope a crash course in riding, helping her onto Duchess's back and showing her how to hold the reins. "Just relax and move with her," he instructed, leading the mare in a circle around the corral. "She knows what she's doing, even if you don't." Penelope gripped the saddle horn tightly, feeling simultaneously terrified and exhilarated as the horse moved beneath her. After a few circuits, Xavier seemed satisfied that she could at least stay mounted for the journey to town. "We'll go slow," he promised, helping her down, "and I'll lead Duchess for most of the way." They set out just as the sun cleared the eastern hills, the morning air still cool against their faces. Xavier rode a sturdy black gelding named Midnight, while Penelope perched somewhat uncertainly on Duchess. True to his word, Xavier kept the pace gentle, frequently checking to ensure Penelope was comfortable. "You're doing well," he encouraged after they'd been riding for an hour. Penelope smiled, feeling more confident. "It's not as difficult as I feared, though I suspect I'll be sore tomorrow." "Worth it for the freedom," Xavier replied. "Nothing compares to the feeling of riding across open country." As they rode, Xavier outlined their plan again. They would go directly to the sheriff's office, demanding to see the receipt for her fine and any other documentation of her release. Then they would confront Theodore Waldman publicly, forcing him to either produce the supposedly stolen necklace or admit his lie. "What if he doesn't back down?" Penelope asked. Xavier's expression hardened. "Then we'll seek another way to prove your innocence. I won't let him destroy your reputation with falsehoods." The determination in his voice gave Penelope courage. Whatever happened in Redemption Springs, she wouldn't face it alone. They reached town around mid-morning. Redemption Springs was already bustling with activity wagons lining the main street, shoppers moving between storefronts, cowboys lounging outside the saloon despite the early hour. Heads turned as Xavier and Penelope rode past, whispers following in their wake. Outside the sheriff's office, Xavier helped Penelope dismount, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. The touch steadied her, grounding her against the fear threatening to overwhelm her resolve. Sheriff Donovan looked up from his desk as they entered, surprise evident on his weathered face. "Wasn't expecting to see you two in town," he drawled, leaning back in his chair. "Figured it was better to face trouble head-on than wait for it to find us," Xavier replied. "We heard Waldman's been spreading lies," the sheriff sighed, rubbing his mustache. "That he has. Claims I had no authority to release Miss Evans, that I was bribed," he snorted. "As if I'd risk my badge for money." "We need the documentation of my release," Penelope said. "The receipt for the fine, anything that proves everything was done legally." Sheriff Donovan nodded, pulling open a drawer. "Got it right here. Been keeping it close, figuring it might be needed." He handed over several pieces of paper. "Fine, receipt, release order, all signed and proper." Xavier examined the documents, then folded them carefully and tucked them into his vest pocket. "Where's Waldman now?" "Probably at his father's store," the sheriff replied. "Been holding court there since yesterday, riling people up." He fixed them with a serious look. "Be careful. Old man, Waldman's got influence in this town, and his son's got friends who don't ask questions before throwing punches." "We'll be careful," Xavier promised. "But we're not leaving until the truth is known." As they stepped back onto the street, Penelope slipped her hand into Xavier's. The simple gesture felt both daring and right, a public declaration of her trust in him. Xavier squeezed her hand in response, a silent promise of support. Waldman's general store stood in the center of town, a large, well-maintained building with a freshly painted sign. Through the large front windows, Penelope could see several men gathered inside, Theodore Waldman's blonde head visible among them. "Ready?" Xavier asked quietly. Penelope took a deep breath and nodded. The bell over the door jangled as they entered, and all conversation ceased abruptly. Theodore Waldman's face drained of color when he saw Penelope, though he quickly recovered, his expression hardening into disdain. "Well, well," he said, his voice carrying in the now silent store. "The thief returns with her outlaw protector." Xavier stepped forward, his posture calm but his eyes hard as flint. "The only criminals here are those who bear false witness, Waldman. Miss Evans paid her fine and was legally released. We have the documentation to prove it." "Documentation can be forged," sneered an older man who Penelope recognized as Theodore's father. "Just like a thief can pretend innocence." "I never stole anything," Penelope stated firmly, finding strength in Xavier's solid presence beside her. "There was no ruby necklace, was there, Theodore?" "It was all a lie to avoid going through with our wedding." Theodore's face flushed. "How dare you accuse me of lying?" "Produce the necklace," Xavier challenged. "Show everyone this valuable family heirloom that was supposedly stolen." "It's been sent away for repair," Theodore replied quickly. "The clasp was damaged when she tried to take it." "Convenient," Xavier remarked dryly. "No proof of theft, just your word against hers." One of the men standing near Theodore stepped forward, a burly fellow with a week's growth of beard. "We don't need proof. Everyone knows mail-order brides are just looking for a meal ticket. She probably thought she'd steal the necklace and run off with the money." Anger flashed in Xavier's eyes, but before he could respond, a new voice entered the conversation. "That's not true, and you know it, Frank Miller." All heads turned to see a woman standing in the doorway, elegantly dressed, with shrewd eyes and silver-streaked hair. Penelope recognized her as Mrs. Harrington, the banker's wife and one of the most respected women in town. "Mrs. Harrington," Theodore said, suddenly looking uncomfortable. "This doesn't concern you." "Oh, but it does," she replied, stepping into the store. "It concerns everyone when a young woman's reputation is being destroyed by lies." She turned to address the gathered men. "Theodore Waldman has been courting my niece, Isabel, for months, even while corresponding with Miss Evans. When Miss Evans arrived, he found himself in quite the predicament." Murmurs rippled through the store. Theodore's face had gone pale again. "That's not," he began, but Mrs. Harrington cut him off. "Furthermore, I've known the Waldman family for 20 years, and never once have I heard mention of a ruby necklace belonging to Theodore's mother. Curious that such a valuable heirloom would never have been discussed or worn in all that time." The older Waldman spluttered. Martha was private about her jewelry. Martha Waldman never missed an opportunity to display her wealth, Mrs. Harrington countered. If she'd owned such a piece, the entire town would have known about it. Penelope watched in amazement as the tide of public opinion visibly shifted. The men who had been backing Theodore now looked at him with doubt, some taking steps away as if to distance themselves from his deception. Theodore's composure cracked. "You can't prove anything?" "Perhaps not," Xavier agreed. "But neither can you, and in this country a person is innocent until proven guilty. Miss Evans has paid whatever debt society claimed she owed. The matter is closed." The elder Waldman, seeing his son's position crumbling, attempted to salvage the situation. "The girl has still brought shame to our family. We demand compensation." "The only shame here belongs to your son," Xavier replied coolly. "Be thankful Miss Evans isn't demanding compensation for false imprisonment and defamation of character." A tense silence fell over the store. Penelope could feel the balance tipping in their favor but knew the situation remained volatile. These men had pride, and wounded pride could be dangerous. Sheriff Donovan chose that moment to enter, his badge gleaming on his chest, hand resting casually near his holster. "Everything all right in here?" he asked mildly, though his eyes were sharp as they surveyed the room. "Just clearing up a misunderstanding, Sheriff," Xavier replied. The sheriff nodded. "Good to hear. By the way, Waldman, I've been thinking about your accusation that I took a bribe to release Miss Evans. That's a serious charge against a law officer. I might have to open an investigation, get testimonies, look into your family's finances, that sort of thing." Theodore blanched. "That won't be necessary. I may have spoken hastily." "And the missing necklace," the sheriff pressed. Theodore glanced at his father, who gave a barely perceptible nod. "It seems I was mistaken. The necklace has been found. It was misplaced, not stolen." The admission hung in the air, its implications clear to everyone present. Penelope felt a weight lift from her shoulders, the burden of false accusation finally removed. Xavier's hand found hers again, squeezing gently in silent congratulation. "Well then," Sheriff Donovan said, "seems there's no more business here. Miss Evans, I believe an apology is owed to you." All eyes turned to Theodore, who looked like he'd rather swallow poison than apologize. After a long, tense moment, he muttered, "I apologize for the misunderstanding." It was inadequate grudging, but it was public. Penelope nodded her acceptance, unwilling to prolong the confrontation. As they prepared to leave, Mrs. Harrington approached them. "Miss Evans, Mr. Yates, I'd be honored if you'd join me for lunch at my home. I believe we have much to discuss." The invitation was unexpected but welcome. They followed Mrs. Harrington to her substantial house near the bank, where a meal was quickly arranged. Over cold chicken and fresh bread, Mrs. Harrington explained her intervention. "I've suspected Theodore's duplicity for some time," she said. "My niece mentioned his sudden reluctance to be seen with her in public after a mail-order bride arrived from Boston. When I heard of your arrest, Miss Evans, I knew something wasn't right." "Why didn't you speak up sooner?" Penelope asked. Mrs. Harrington sighed. "I needed evidence." "It wasn't until yesterday, when Theodore began boasting about forming a posse to recapture you, that I realized how far he was willing to go to maintain his lie." "We're grateful for your help," Xavier said sincerely. Mrs. Harrington studied them both, a knowing smile playing at her lips. "It seems Miss Evans has found a champion in you, Mr. Yates. One might almost call it providence." Penelope felt her cheeks warm under the woman's perceptive gaze. "Or perhaps just common decency," Xavier replied, though the glance he cast at Penelope suggested something deeper. They left town in the early afternoon, both feeling lighter despite the physical and emotional exhaustion of the confrontation. As they rode side by side, Penelope noticed Xavier watching her with an expression she couldn't quite interpret. "What is it?" she asked. "You were brave today," he said simply. "Not many would have faced their accusers so directly," Penelope smiled. "I had good reason to be brave. You were beside me." The remainder of the ride passed in companionable silence, each lost in their own thoughts about the day's events and what might come next. The tension that had driven them to town had dissipated, replaced by a quiet contentment and the growing certainty that something significant had changed between them. When they reached the Diamond Y, the sun was beginning to set, painting the ranch in golden light. Xavier helped Penelope dismount, his hands lingering at her waist as they had that morning. "Penelope," he began, his voice low and serious, "what I wanted to tell you yesterday." She looked up at him, her heart racing. "Yes, I know it's too soon and you've been through so much. But these past days with you here, they've meant something to me. You've meant something to me." Penelope swallowed against the emotion rising in her throat. "And you to me, Xavier." He took her hands in his expression earnest. "I'm not asking for promises or commitments, just stay. Not as a guest or because you have nowhere else to go, but because you want to be here. With me." The sincerity in his eyes took her breath away. After everything, the betrayals, the false accusations, the public humiliation, here was a man offering not just shelter but the possibility of something real and lasting. "I want to stay," she whispered, the words carrying all the hope and fear and longing she'd held inside. Xavier's smile transformed his face, erasing the lines of worry that had been present since they'd learned of Theodore's threats. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers in a gentle, questioning kiss. Penelope responded with all the certainty she felt, her hands moving to his shoulders as the kiss deepened into something warm and promising. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since the moment you walked out of that jail cell," he admitted. Penelope laughed softly. "Even in that filthy wedding dress, even then," he confirmed. "You looked like a woman who wouldn't be broken by circumstances. I admired that immediately." They walked hand in hand to the house, where they found Hank and Rosa had returned from town, full of questions about the confrontation with Waldman. As they recounted the day's events over dinner, Penelope was struck by how right it felt to be here, surrounded by these good people who had accepted her without judgment. Later that evening, she and Xavier sat on the porch swing, watching as stars appeared one by one in the darkening sky. His arm rested comfortably around her shoulders, her head leaning against him in a posture that felt both new and somehow familiar. "What happens now?" Penelope asked softly. Xavier considered the question. "That depends on what you want, Penelope. The Diamond Y could use a woman's touch." He paused, "I could use a partner in all things." The implication was clear, though he hadn't explicitly proposed. Penelope appreciated his restraint, his understanding that she might need time. "I think," she said carefully, "that I'd like to learn more about ranching. About this land that you love so much, about you." Xavier's arm tightened around her. "I'd like that too. We have time, all the time you need." As they sat together under the vast Arizona sky, Penelope reflected on the strange, twisted path that had led her here. From Boston to Redemption Springs to a jail cell to this ranch, each step, even the painful ones, had been necessary to bring her to this moment, this man. For the first time in years, perhaps for the first time ever, she felt truly at home. Over the next few weeks, Penelope immersed herself in ranch life with enthusiasm. Xavier taught her to ride properly, spending patient hours in the corral until she felt confident enough to accompany him on short rides around the property. Rosa showed her the intricacies of cooking on a wood stove and managing a household in the frontier, while Hank regaled her with stories of the early days of the Diamond Y. Her relationship with Xavier deepened with each passing day. They worked side by side when possible, talked late into the evenings, and shared increasingly affectionate moments away from prying eyes. Xavier was respectful of her boundaries, never pushing for more than she was ready to give, but his feelings were evident in every glance, every touch, every thoughtful gesture. 1 month after the confrontation in town, Xavier suggested a picnic by the small creek that ran through the eastern edge of the property. "It's my favorite spot on the ranch," he explained as they rode out together, a basket of food secured behind his saddle. "I wanted to share it with you." The location proved to be as beautiful as Xavier had described, a clear stream bubbling over rocks, shaded by cottonwoods, with wildflowers dotting the grassy bank. They spread a blanket and unpacked the lunch Rosa had prepared: cold chicken, biscuits, preserves, and a special treat of apple pie. As they ate, Xavier seemed uncharacteristically nervous, starting conversations only to let them trail off, his eyes frequently darting to Penelope's face and then away again. "Is something wrong?" she finally asked. Xavier set down his plate and took a deep breath. "No, nothing's wrong. Just the opposite, in fact." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. "I've been carrying this around for a week, waiting for the right moment." Penelope's heart began to race as he opened the box to reveal a simple but beautiful ring, a gold band set with a small sapphire. "It was my mother's," Xavier explained. "My father gave it to me before he died, said I should save it for when I found the woman I wanted to spend my life with." He met her eyes, his own filled with emotion. "I've found her, Penelope, if you'll have me." Tears sprang to Penelope's eyes, not tears of sadness or fear as she'd shed so often in recent months, but tears of pure joy. "Xavier Yates," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "I would be honored to be your wife." His face broke into a radiant smile as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had always been meant for her hand. Xavier pulled her into his arms, sealing their engagement with a kiss that promised a lifetime of love and partnership. When they returned to the ranch house, hand in hand with the ring gleaming on Penelope's finger, Rosa took one look at them and burst into happy tears. "Finally," she exclaimed, embracing them both. "I've been praying for this since the day you arrived, Miss Penelope." Hank clapped Xavier on the shoulder, his weathered face creased in a rare, wide smile. "About time, boss. You've been mooning over her like a lovesick calf." Xavier laughed, not bothering to deny it. "Can you blame me?" They decided on a simple ceremony in 2 weeks' time. Neither wanted to wait longer, and both preferred the intimacy of a small wedding at the ranch to a town affair that might stir up painful memories. News of their engagement spread quickly through the area. To Penelope's surprise, several of the neighboring ranchers' wives called at the Diamond Y, bringing gifts and well wishes. Mrs. Harrington sent a beautiful lace tablecloth with a note expressing her delight at their happiness. Even Sheriff Donovan rode out to offer his congratulations. "Town's talking about nothing else," he informed them with a chuckle. "The Waldmans are fit to be tied, of course, but everyone else seems pleased as punch." The day before the wedding, as Penelope was helping Rosa prepare food for the celebration, a wagon approached the ranch. To her astonishment, she recognized the driver as Mrs. Pringle, the boarding house owner who had thrown out her possessions after her arrest. "Miss Evans," the woman called, climbing down from the wagon with some difficulty. "I've brought something that belongs to you." From the back of the wagon, she retrieved a small trunk. "Your things," she explained, not quite meeting Penelope's eyes. "I didn't throw them out after all, just put them aside." Penelope was speechless at this unexpected development. Mrs. Pringle fidgeted with her bonnet strings. "Mrs. Harrington suggested I should return them, said it was the Christian thing to do." She hesitated, then added gruffly, "I may have been hasty in my judgment of you, Miss Evans. I apologize for that." It wasn't a full admission of wrongdoing, but Penelope recognized it as the best the proud woman could offer. "Thank you for bringing my things, Mrs. Pringle. Would you like to stay for some refreshment?" The woman shook her head. "Best be getting back to town, but—" "Congratulations on your marriage. Mr. Yates is a good man." After she'd gone, Penelope opened the trunk with trembling hands. Inside were her few precious possessions: books, letters from her parents, a daguerreotype of her mother, and several dresses she'd made herself. At the bottom lay a small velvet pouch containing her mother's pearl earrings, the only valuable thing she owned, which she'd been saving to wear on her wedding day. "A sign," Rosa declared when Penelope showed her the earrings. "God wanted you to have something of your mother with you tomorrow." The wedding day dawned clear and perfect, the October air crisp but not cold. Hank had constructed an arch of twisted branches near the creek where Xavier had proposed, and Rosa had decorated it with wildflowers and ribbons. The ranch hands had built benches for the small group of guests, neighbors, friends, and even a few townspeople who had stood by Penelope during her ordeal in the bedroom that would soon be hers and Xavier's. Penelope dressed with Rosa's help. Her wedding gown was new, a gift from Mrs. Harrington, who had insisted on having it made by the town's seamstress. It was simpler than the elaborate dress she'd worn for her ill-fated wedding to Theodore, but far more beautiful to Penelope's eyes. The ivory silk fell in clean lines from a modestly scooped neckline, the bodice adorned with delicate lace that matched the short veil. Her mother's pearl earrings completed the ensemble, along with a bouquet of late-blooming wildflowers tied with blue ribbon to match Xavier's eyes. "You look beautiful," Rosa said, her own eyes misty. "Like you were born to be the mistress of this ranch." A knock at the door revealed Mrs. Harrington, elegant in plum-colored silk. "The guests are ready, my dear, and I believe your groom is about to wear a hole in the ground with his pacing." Penelope laughed, happiness bubbling up inside her. This was right, not the rushed wedding to a stranger that had nearly been her fate, but a union based on respect, shared experiences, and deepening love. Outside, the small gathering rose as Penelope appeared. She saw only Xavier, standing tall and handsome in a new black suit, his eyes fixed on her with an expression of wonder and devotion that made her heart soar. The minister from the church in Redemption Springs conducted a simple service. When it came time for the vows, Xavier took Penelope's hands in his voice strong and sure as he promised to love, honor, and cherish her for all his days. Penelope's own voice was steady as she made the same promises, meaning every word with all her heart. As Xavier slipped a gold band onto her finger to join her engagement ring, she felt a sense of rightness that transcended the ceremony itself, a bone-deep certainty that she had found her place in the world. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Xavier kissed her then, a gentle, reverent kiss that still managed to convey the depth of his feelings. The small crowd applauded, and Hank let out an uncharacteristic whoop of joy that made everyone laugh. The celebration that followed was joyful and relaxed. Tables had been set up in the yard, laden with food and drink. A fiddler played lively tunes, and even the most dignified guests eventually joined in the dancing. As evening approached, Xavier led Penelope away from the festivities for a moment of privacy. "Happy Mrs. Yates?" he asked, his arms encircling her waist. Penelope smiled at the new name, leaning into his embrace. "Happier than I ever thought possible. When I paid your fine that day, I never imagined." Xavier shook his head in wonder. "It was the best money I ever spent," Penelope laughed softly. "From prisoner to bride in 1 month, not the most conventional courtship." "Nothing about us has been conventional," Xavier agreed. "But I wouldn't change a moment of it. Every step led us here to each other." They rejoined their guests for the final dances and farewells. As the last wagon pulled away, Hank and Rosa tactfully retired to their cabin, leaving the newlyweds alone. In the privacy of what was now their bedroom, Xavier and Penelope came together as husband and wife, their union a tender discovery of each other that deepened the bond already formed between them. Later, as they lay entwined in the darkness, Xavier whispered, "Welcome home, Penelope Yates." And Penelope, nestled against the heart of the man who had believed in her when no one else would, knew that she had finally found what she'd been searching for all her life, not just a place to belong, but a love worth any hardship she had endured to find it. In the years that followed, the Diamond Y flourished under their joint care. Penelope brought new ideas and energy to the ranch, expanding the garden into a productive vegetable plot that supplied not only their table but also provided extra produce to sell in town. She started a small chicken operation that soon became known for producing the best eggs in the county, and her preserves won ribbons at the territorial fair. Xavier, bolstered by Penelope's support and practical intelligence, made shrewd business decisions that expanded their holdings and improved their stock. Together, they built the Diamond Y into one of the most respected ranches in the territory. 2 years after their wedding, their joy multiplied with the birth of their first child, a daughter they named Sarah Rose, with Xavier's dark hair and Penelope's determined spirit. A son, James Henry, followed 18 months later, and another daughter, Elizabeth Martha, 2 years after that. The ranch house expanded along with their family, adding rooms and a larger kitchen where friends and neighbors frequently gathered. The Diamond Y became known for its hospitality as well as its prosperity, a place where travelers could count on a good meal and fair treatment. Theodore Waldman eventually left Redemption Springs, moving to California after his father's business failed a development that some attributed to the community's gradual withdrawal of support following the truth about his treatment of Penelope. The scandal faded with time, replaced by respect for the woman who had overcome false accusation to build a meaningful life. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Xavier surprised Penelope with a special gift, the deed to the 20 acres surrounding the creek where he had proposed, now officially registered as Penelope's place in the territorial records. "This land has always been special to me," he told her as they stood by the water, their children playing nearby under Rosa's watchful eye. "Now it will always be yours, no matter what happens." Penelope, touched beyond words, could only embrace him, marveling at how completely her life had transformed from that terrible day in the sheriff's cell. What had seemed like the end of all her hopes had instead been the beginning of a journey she could never have imagined. "Do you ever regret it?" She asked Xavier that night as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. "Paying my fine, bringing me here," Xavier's arm tightened around her shoulders. "Not for a single moment," he replied with absolute certainty. "That was the day I found everything I never knew I was looking for." Penelope rested her head against his shoulder, contentment filling her heart. From a jail cell to this, a home, a family, a love that had only deepened with time. Sometimes, she reflected, the most beautiful journeys begin in the darkest places, and the strongest bonds are forged through trials overcome together. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Xavier kissed her with the same tenderness he had shown on their wedding day, a silent reaffirmation of the vows that had joined their lives and hearts. And Penelope knew, with absolute certainty, that no matter what challenges the future might hold, they would face them as they had faced everything else together, their love a shelter stronger than any storm.